Hello. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the different cognitive processes that are involved in some mental health problems, relationships between them. So, one of the interesting thing is that people, not people without depression, they have what is called, they're overconfident about things. They show overconfidence in their knowledge and their skills and their abilities, overconfident in how long it'll take them to get a task done, etc. But people with depression actually display this thing called depressive realism, where a person that is mildly depressed is actually pretty good at making estimations about judgments, attributions, predictions, etc. Some evolutionary psychologists have actually used this finding as an explanation for how depression could, in fact, have been maintained across the human evolutionary cycle because having mild depression does, in fact, keep you in tune with reality. I don't know, it seems far-fetched, but it's an interesting thought. So when we're talking about these different cognitive things associated with, we can find that explanatory style is this question of the way that you explain life events. Okay, you can explain them negatively, positively. There's lots of different ways that we can have a style of explaining. And so what we find is that people that are more depressive, the explanatory style, depressive explanatory style, people with depression's explanatory style, is like, let's say, I mean, how do I put it? Shit happens, okay? Shit happens to everybody. Bad stuff happens, okay? I failed a test. I don't know, something like that, okay? So what's going on? Person with an optimistic style fails a test and goes, it's a one-off. It's temporary, no problem. Whereas a person with a depressive attributional style is more likely to say, this is going to happen again and again and again. Then a person with an optimistic style says, you know what? It sucks for this class, but it doesn't affect anything else, right? That's no problem. Whereas a person with more of a depressive style says, you know what? This failure is just, it's going to cripple me. I'm over. It's going to ruin me in everything to go. And finally, and somebody with more of a optimistic style will look at that failure and say, it wasn't me per se. Maybe, you know what, maybe I can just study harder next time and it'll be okay. Whereas a person with the depressive attributional style says, you know what, I failed because I suck. All right. And there ain't nothing you can do about suck. So what we find is that if you perceive the failure to be global, stable, and internal, you get quite a negative, depressive outcome. When we feel happy, we tend to think happy. I like it. But what happens is that the vicious cycle of depression, and so negative experience can trigger this self-focused rumination, self-blame, and so we see in this vicious circle here, a negative experience might start the cycle, but the cycle then feeds itself. But at least the good thing or the good news about this cycle is that often if you've got this cycle feeding itself, you should be able to starve the cycle at any point by removing this, feeding into the circle. Loneliness is an interesting uh, cognitive component of many mental disorders. An awareness that social relationships are less than we would desire. Loneliness has nothing to do with actually being around people. Adolescents say they experience more loneliness than an adult does. I don't know. I think maybe because they define themselves more by their social relationships. People that are lonely rate other people more. And so loneliness is related to shyness. As we can see, hey, cat's biting my feet. Okay, as we can see, shyness can create loneliness. Loneliness can create depression. Shyness can create depression. Depression can create loneliness and shyness. So clearly, it's a vicious chain. And often loneliness can, in fact, also be based on attributions and attributional styles. And so if you have perhaps an external stable, no, what am I doing? Internal stable, Oh, I see. Um, right. So if it's internal and stable, then loneliness seems inevitable. But if the attribution is for either external or unstable sources, you can usually do something about it. That's what I was trying to say. In a lot of words, I got it. Shyness is basically a form of social anxiety, characterized self-consciousness and worry and things of this nature, doubt in social situations, or over-personalizing. Somebody says something in an offhanded manner, and it is taken in as a very highly personal statement, which was intended to hurt you or something, and it was just an offhand comment that somebody didn't even think hard about. So it's an interesting thing. Shy people overestimate how much others are noticing things like pimples or something like that. Shy people often can, view the people whispering next to them as something related to them. It's an interesting thing. All right, health, illness, and death. Yeah, there is a whole realm of psychology called health psychology, which clearly falls into more of a clinical realm. But health psychology is the study of the psychological roots of health and illness. In a lot of ways, health psychology is the idea that we should do things that will prevent illness from occurring, rather than try to fix illness once it's happened. Okay, and so behavioral medicine and health psychology are intimately related to each other. And so a health psychologist would let's look at those factors such as lack of exercise, smoking, eating, etc., that are feeding into the illness, and let's create intervention plans to modify those things before they create a problem. This is an interesting slide. I'm not really sure why it's titled Health, Illness, and Death. But you know what? Here's where it's got it. I have no idea. And so what they did was they took women during their menstrual cycles and they had them report their moods every day. All right. And then what happened was at the end of the month they had them record the mood that they remember. And it turned out that if you take a look, the orange lines, their actual reported moods daily, that is during premenstrual, menstrual, and between cycles, they reported much the same moods when reported on a daily basis. But when women looked back on a month in hindsight and reported what they believed they remembered, then all of a sudden they remembered negative moods during the menstrual cycle. Kind of an interesting graph here. It's an interesting story. All right. So, what other kinds of cognitive things might influence symptomology? Type A people. Wow, type A people have much more heart disease. Remember, type A people are people that are hard driven and aggressive and go, go, go. And, type B people are like, let's just enjoy the world, okay? And so it's a major difference. And so people that are type A, people that are type A are much more heart disease, much more problems, much more issues. So also now, people that experience stressful experiences have more illness and disease. And again, going back to that explanatory style, if somebody has a depressive explanatory style and somebody has an optimistic explanatory style, and they both experience the same thing, like failure of a test, clearly the person with the optimistic explanatory style does not see it as a stressful event in the same way that the person with the depressive explanatory style does. And similarly, learned helplessness and experiences of learned helplessness. So stress can create lots of problems in the body. Anger-prone people can have all kinds of health problems. And here we've got the Delaney sisters, both over 100, and they say, look, the reason that we've lived so long is a positive outlook on life. And sure, it's not that simple. There's far more to health than that. But boy, that's a pretty good start. All right.